Hello, Chapter 1. It's about the major themes of anatomy and physiology. During this chapter, we will see what is anatomy and what is physiology and how they interrelate. Now, anatomy, it is the science that is in charge of studying the form or structure of the parts of a body, and one of the simplest forms to study anatomy is by examining the structure of the human body through inspection. Inspection is a method in which you can use your eyes by looking at the body appearance, and it's part of a physical examination. Along with that, another way to examine the human body is through palpation, which is feeling a structure with your hands, and you can also perform auscultation, which is listening with an stethoscope to the sounds that are produced by different structures in the human body. Percussion is another method that it is used to examine the body by tapping in the body and then listening to the sounds that are produced after you tap into different portions of the body. Now, in order to have a deeper understanding of the structure of the body, you can perform a dissection, which is carefully cutting or separating tissues to reveal their relationship. In medical schools, in order for the students to learn anatomy, they use a cadaver dissection. Now, an indirect way for us to study anatomy, it is through comparative anatomy, which is a branch that studies multiple species in order to examine their similarities and also what are their differences. And with this, we can gain understanding indirectly about the human structure. Another way that we can use for seeing deeper structures in the body is through exploratory surgery. Now, in exploratory surgery, you have the opening of the body, and then you take a look inside to see what is wrong and what could be done with it. Now, if you want to see indirectly the internal structures of the body without performing surgery, you can use medical imaging. And one of the branches of the techniques of medical imaging is radiology. Radiology is a branch of medicine that it is concerned with the study of internal structures through the use of different techniques. Now, gross anatomy, it is the observation of structures with your naked eye. Histology, it is also known as the study of the tissues with the aid of a microscope. Histopathology, it is microscopic examination of tissues for looking to signs of disease. Cytology is the study of the structure of individual cells, and you use also as well a microscope. Now, if you want to gain a deeper and detailed knowledge of molecules in the cells or structures within the cells, you use the ultrastructure studies that are done with many sophisticated microscopes, including electron microscopes. So in this figure, we are looking at different levels of studying the body structure. So you can use, as we said before, exploratory surgery by opening the body and you can see the internal organs. Also, you can look with a microscope the different structures or cells, and in this case this will be histology. If you want to look at individual cells using a microscope and its organelles, you will use cytology. If you want to see internal structures within the body, you will perform medical imaging. In this case, you have a CT scan in the thoracic area showing you the lungs and the heart and other structures as well. Gross anatomy is seeing the structures in the body with naked eye. In this case, this is a kidney, so you can see the major structures of a kidney. Now, physiology is the study of the function. Physiology will use methods that are experimental, and these methods are able for us to understand how the structures of the body function. For instance, we have subdisciplines that study the function of the nervous system or the physiology of the nervous system. In this case, this will be called neurophysiology. A branch of medicine that study not only the physiology or the function of hormones, but the physiology or the study of tissues within the endocrine system or the glands in our body, it is known as endocrinology. Pathophysiology, it's a branch of medicine that it helps us to understand the mechanisms of disease, like what is the cause of the disease, if it's not the cause, if you want to know how the disease starts and how the disease ends. This is part of pathophysiology. Now we have a branch of science that is known as comparative physiology that similarly as for the comparative anatomy, study the physiology of the structures across different species so you can understand the body functions. And this will help us to understand better the human body, and it can help us also to develop new drugs and medical procedures to apply in humans. Now, our bodies are composed of different structures, or parts of our body are composed of different structures, and this is part of the hierarchy of complexity of the human body. This hierarchy of the human body or complexity of the human body, it is important to understand because many things that affects the body starts at the more simple level, which is when someone has a disease in their genes, if they have a mutation within their genes. So we can study the hierarchy or complexity of the human body from the organism level, in which the organism is the complete individual, which is composed of 11 organ systems. Now, an organ system, it is a group of organs that have a unique collective function, such as circulation of the blood, breathing, or digestion. And these organ systems, since they are composed of a group of organs, they will provide these essential functions to the entire organism. Now, an organ, it is a structure that is composed of two or more tissues, and these tissues work together to carry a particular function. An organ has definitely anatomical boundaries that are visible and that are distinguishable from nearby structures. Most of the organs that we have in our body have high levels of organization within their structures, and then they can be recognized as such. And we have examples of organs in our body like glands, nerves, blood vessels, stomach, etc. Now, tissues are composed of similar cells, so these are masses of similar cells, and these cells are confined within a discrete region of an organ, and they perform a specific function. Within our body, we have four major classes of tissues. We have epithelial tissue, connective tissue, we have nervous tissue, and muscular tissue. And again, the branch of science that study tissues is known as histology. Now, cells will be the smallest unit within an organism, and this cell can be considered the basic structural and functional unit in the organism. So cells are the building blocks that helps this organism to live. And a cell, it is enclosed by a plasma membrane, and this plasma membrane, it is composed of molecules that we know as lipids and proteins. And many cells in our body have a nucleus or an organelle that has a structure that is called deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. And within this DNA, we contain the genes or the units that are going to provide instructions for these cells to function and to have a specific function provided to this organism. The next level of hierarchy will be the organelles. So the organelles are microscopic structures that are found within the cells that carry out individual functions. Examples of organelles will be the mitochondria, centrioles, lysosomes, and these organelles are composed of molecules. The molecules are structures that are formed from at least two atoms. And within our cells, we have molecules like proteins, lipids or fats, we have DNA, and we have carbohydrates. These four structures are called in our body macromolecules. Now, these molecules are composed of atoms, which will be in our body the most small unit that has a definitive chemical structure. So in this figure, you can see the body structural hierarchy, starting from atoms that forms molecules, the molecules that forms macromolecules, macromolecules that forms organelles, the organelles that are found within the cells that they organize and form tissues, and several tissues will form an organ, and several organs connect either physically or chemically or both, and they form an organ system. And then together, all 11 organ systems that we have in our body will form an individual or an organism. Now, in order for us to study anatomy, we have the use of the anatomical position and body planes. In the anatomical position, an individual is standing erect or in upright position. The person will be facing forward with the legs and feet close together. Their arms of the person will be hanging on the sides, close to the body, and the palms and the toes of the person will be facing forward. Now, based on this anatomical position, you can give terminology or words for how the structures in the body are located. Anything that it is in the front, for instance, is called anterior. Anything that it is in the back is posterior. Anything that it's above is called superior. Anything that it is below, it is called inferior. Anything in the midline is called medial. Anything on the sides is called lateral. Anything in the limbs closer to the trunk is called proximal. Anything in the trunk or in the limbs, anything in the limbs closer to the trunk will be proximal. Anything in the limbs away from the trunk will be called distal. Anything internal or deep will be called internal. Anything in the surface of the body will be called superficial. Now, if you want to study internally the structures of our body, you will use imaginary sections or body planes. And we have three major body planes. We have other ones, but these are the three major ones. If you make a transverse or cross section, this will be a cut that will run from side to side or from anterior and posterior portion using the short axis of the body. And then with these transverse planes, you will have two sections in our body, one that it is superior and another one that it is inferior. If you make a cut on the side of the body that can divide your body into anterior and posterior regions, this will be called frontal or coronal section, as you can see here in purple. Now, if you make a section or a cut that goes along the long axis of the body, so from head to toes, this will be a sagittal plane. And this sagittal plane can divide the body into two lateral regions, one that is left and one that it is right. And if that sagittal plane or section runs in the mid part of the body, that will be mid-sagittal, but if it runs on one side or the other, that will be called parasagittal. Now, with these planes or sections, then you can study the internal structures of the body, and you can ask imaging studies with a particular section or plane. Now, some additional sections will be some sections that runs in an angle. This will be called oblique, and it can provide you with certain information if you require it. Now, when you make sections of our body, you will be able to see that within our body we have body cavities. And within these body cavities, we have these structures or these organs that are important for us to know. So, we have within our body, we have two major cavities. We have one cavity that is called anterior or ventral because it's found in the front. And we have another one that is called posterior or dorsal because it's located in the back of our body. Now, this anterior or ventral body cavity, it is formed by the thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities. And these two cavities are separated by the diaphragm, which is a muscle that it is located here between the thorax and the abdomen, which are these two regions. So this is the thorax and this is the abdomen. So this is the left lateral view of the anterior cavity. So this is the thoracic cavity and this is the abdominal pelvic cavity. And they are separated by the diaphragm. Now, this is a key point for you to know then. During these video lectures, I will be using the phrase or the word key points, meaning that you need to know these principles or these concepts. So the posterior or dorsal body cavity, which is this that you can see here in the lateral view of the body, it is subdivided into the cranial cavity and vertebral cavities. So this is the vertebral cavity and this is the cranial cavity. And within this posterior or dorsal body cavity, we have, of course, the brain and we have the spinal cord. And this posterior dorsal cavity is more protected than the ventral. The ventral body cavity is less protected than the dorsal because at some point the brain and the spinal cord, they have a more important function than the organs that we have within this anterior ventral cavity. Now, the anterior ventral cavity has also these minor subcavities. It has the pleural cavity in the thoracic area, which is the cavity where we hold our lungs, and then it has this pericardial cavity, where it is where we hold our heart. And then the pelvic cavity here, within the abdominal pelvic cavity, it is this cavity that is found below a structure that we call the anterior superior iliac spine and the sacral promontory in one bone that we have here within our spinal column that we call the sacrum. And you can see it here in yellow, the pelvic cavity. So there is no physical division between the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity as we have here for the thoracic cavity and the abdominal pelvic cavity. So this is just an imaginary line that runs between the anterior superior iliac spine and the promontory of the sacrum bone. Now within this cavity, or these cavities in our body, we have body membranes, which are these wrappings inside our cavities that helps to protect our organs by creating compartments. Many of these organs are very important in their function, that they need to be separated by these body membranes so that they don't get erosion through friction, or they are protected from the spreading of infections or diseases. So in this case, for the thoracic cavity, we have here the pericardial cavity. And the pericardial cavity has two membranes. It has the parietal pericardium and it has the visceral pericardium, which is a double membrane that protects our heart. Now within the thoracic cavity, we also have the pleuras, which are two membranes that protects our lungs. So we have the visceral pleura, that it is in close contact with the lungs, and then we have the parietal pleura, which is the second layer or second wrapping that protects our lungs. So in this case, we have a compartment for the heart, which is called the pericardium, and a compartment for our lungs that are called the pleuras. Now, if you make a transverse section of our abdominal pelvic cavity at the level of the second lumbar vertebrae, we have this vertebrae in our spinal column that is called second lumbar. So you will be able to see the kidneys that are protected by some membranes. And one of these membranes, it is the parietal peritoneum. And all the organs that are located behind this parietal peritoneum are called retroperitoneal organ, because retro means behind. So any organ that it is behind this parietal peritoneum, which is this blue membrane that you see here, it is called retroperitoneal. So you can see here then the kidneys, you can see these blood vessels in here that are called the inferior vena cava, and then the aorta. And then within this abdominal pelvic cavity, you have the visceral peritoneum, that is also known as serosa, that makes this protection for the organs anterior to the peritoneum. And the organs anterior to the peritoneum are located within a cavity that is called the peritoneal cavity. So another name for this abdominal pelvic cavity, especially in the abdominal area, it is called the peritoneal cavity. So if you see a mid-sagittal view of the abdominal pelvic cavity, you will be able to see how this membrane, the parietal and the visceral peritoneum, will protect these organs within the abdominal pelvic cavity. So we have here the liver, we have the stomach, and then we have the intestines, the small intestines, and then the large intestine in here. And these are protected by these membranes. So in this case, we have a membrane that is called the greater mentum, and then we have the mesentery that holds the loops of intestines. And this mesentery or posterior mesentery is made by the visceral peritoneum, and you can see it in here on this panel. Okay, so this is the visceral peritoneum. Now within our abdominal area, in the surface, you can trace lines, imaginary lines, so you can divide the abdominal area into regions or into several areas. So if you make a line that goes through the middle of our abdominal area, which is the umbilicus or navel, that goes from side to side, a transverse line like this. And if you trace a midline like this that runs in the mid-sagittal area of our body, you will produce 4 quadrants. The right upper quadrant on the right side, the left upper quadrant on the left side, and below this you will have the left lower quadrant and the right lower quadrant. This general division will give us an idea of where certain organs are located. So in the case of the right upper quadrant, for instance, you cannot see it in here but labeled, but here we have the liver. So this is another key point, so that the liver is located in the right upper quadrant. Now in the left upper quadrant, we have the stomach, we have the spleen, and so on and so forth. Now you can make more subdivisions of the abdominal area into 9 regions. So if you trace a line that goes transversely or horizontally like this one through the anterior superior iliac spine, and then you make another line that goes just at the edge of the ribs, as you can see here. Also this line will go horizontally, and you make a couple of lines that runs vertically like this, that runs in the middle of the clavicle, which is a bone that we have in here. You will produce 9 regions. So these middle regions from up to down or from superior to inferior will be called the epigastric region, the most superior one. Then umbilical region, this mid region in here that it's around the navel or the umbilical area. And then below, next to the genital area, will be the hypochondriac region, or sorry, hypogastric region. Now on the right side of the epigastric region, you have the hypochondriac region. Why is called the hypochondriac region? And it will be right hypochondriac region because you have the ribs in here, and one part of the ribs is made out of a structure is called the cartilage, and the name for cartilage in Latin will be chondriac or chondros. Okay, so the hypochondriac region will be the region that is located hypo, below, the chondros, below the cartilage of the ribs. And then below the hypochondriac region, we have the lumbar region. So we have the right and the left lumbar regions in here. And then below the lumbar regions, we have the pelvic regions or inguinal regions in here. So the right and the left. So organs that you can find here in the right pelvic or inguinal region will be the appendix, which is part of the large intestine. And then an organ that you can find here on the right hypochondriac region will be the liver, the gallbladder. In the epigastric region, you will be able to see part of the liver, part of the stomach, and then on the left hypochondriac region, the spleen. And then ascending colon on the right lumbar region, and then posteriorly in the back will be the left kidney. On the right side will be the right kidney, on the left side the left kidney. And then in the hypogastric region for females, we will have the uterus, the ovaries, and for both sexes or genders, the urinary bladder, and then the urethra. Now, in our body, we have body systems that are 11, and these body systems have several organs that can be physically or chemically connected, as I said before, and they have specific functions provided to the organism. And all the 11 body systems are integrated, and they help to maintain a healthy condition in our body or an equilibrium that we know as homeostasis. So in this figure, you can see some of these body systems, like in the case of the integumentary system, that it is made by the skin, hair, nails, the subcutaneous glands that provides sweat and oils that lubricates our skin. Main functions of this integumentary system will be to protect our internal organs, also to help us to retain water so we don't dehydrate, and also it helps us to regulate our temperature, so thermoregulation will be one of the functions. Through this system, we also produce vitamin D, which is important for the absorption of calcium so that our teeth and our bones are healthy because they are made out of calcium. And also we have receptors in our skin that are called cutaneous receptors that help us to detect signals that are found in the environment. And also we can provide nonverbal communication because many of the muscles in our skin, in our face, are connected to the skin of our face, and we can produce emotions through the movement of these muscles. So we can tell if someone is angry, if someone is happy, etc. So this is an example then of our integumentary system and of our body systems. So we have also the skeletal system, muscular system, lymphatic, respiratory system, urinary system, and then you can see there what are their functions. So we have in this case the list of the body systems. We have integumentary, skeletal, muscular system, lymphatic, respiratory, urinary, nervous, endocrine, circulatory, digestive, and reproductive. In here, they separate in this figure the male and the female reproductive system, but in general, the function is the same, which is to reproduce or to perpetuate our species. Now, in anatomy, we will use a specific naming of things, which is the terminology. And this naming is important because it provides a specific relationship that it is important for understand and communicate in proper anatomical language. So examples of anatomic terminology of the different areas of the head are found here in this picture. So the forehead region, for instance, is called frontal. The region of our eyes or around the eyes is called orbital. The region of our nose is called nasal. The region around our mouth is called oral. The region of our chin is called mental. The region of our neck is called cervical. The region of our cheeks is called buccal. The region posterior to the and inferior to the back of our neck and the most inferior region of our head is called the nuchal region or posterior cervical. The region of our ears is called auricular. The region here in between the ear and our eyes is called temporal. The region of the most upper and posterior part of our skull is called occipital. And then in our face, more specific terminology that you can see, it is, for instance, this region where we have the eyebrows will be the superciliary region. And then you can see something that is called the superior palpebral sulcus, which is this little folding that it is located within our upper eyelid. And then you have this inferior palpebral sulcus that is in our inferior eyelid. And then here within the the oral region, just in the middle of our upper part of our lips, we have the philtrum. And then the lips, specifically the region of our lips will be the labia, etc. So you can see here many examples of the terminology of anatomy, and then you will see more in the lab. Now, you can expect in anatomy, when you're inspecting a body, in some cases to have anatomical variation. And that anatomical variation, it is normal in some cases, and no two humans are alike. We are similar, but we are not exactly alike. So in anatomy textbooks, you will find the most common of organization of the structures, but you can find some individuals that may have an atypical number of vertebrae, so some of them may have an extra vertebrae. So instead of having 7 cervical vertebrae that we normally have, or 7 vertebrae in our neck, the person might have 8. Some individuals, instead of having 1 kidney, might have instead of having 2 kidneys, they might have 1. Some individuals might have the organs that correspond to be in the left side of our body, they might have it in the right, and this is known as situs inversus. And this is an anatomical variation. So in here, you can see some anatomical variations. So for instance, our kidneys, we have 2 kidneys and they are located within the lumbar area. But in this case, you can have a pelvic kidney in which the right kidney is located far away from the lumbar area. And then instead of having 2 kidneys, you can have only 1, which is called horseshoe kidney, in which the kidneys are connected in their inferior portion, forming like a horseshoe, and then forming a single kidney instead of 2. For the blood vessels that arise from the heart, you here have 3 blood vessels, and then in this anatomical variation you have only 2, and then again in here you have 2, and then in here you have 4. So these are some anatomical variations that sometimes you can find. And these are just examples. Now, some of the characteristics of human beings as being alive is that they have a specific organization of or arrangement of structures that sometimes it is more complex than non-living creatures or organisms. Now, the cellular composition is another characteristic of life in which organisms have cells of different structure and function that you cannot find anywhere else. And then our organisms have our organism have these chemical reactions that are constantly happening inside our bodies that we know as metabolism, because we are always making structures, and then we are remodeling these structures, or we are breaking chemical bonds to gain energy, etc. So one of the characteristics of life is that an organism has a metabolism. Now, another characteristic of life is that the organisms have responsiveness. So they have the ability to be able to sense the environment and to react to this environment. And these reactions can be irritability or excitability. Another characteristic of life is that the organisms move, or that they can transport substances within the organism. So for instance, when we ingest food, that food will pass from the mouth into the esophagus and to the stomach, and then into the rest of the structures within our digestive system, so we can sustain life. A very important part of a living organism is that it is capable of maintaining a relatively constant or stable internal environment or conditions. This is known as homeostasis. And this is another key point that you need to know and memorize. So homeostasis by definition is maintaining a relatively constant, stable internal conditions. For instance, within our body, we have to maintain a specific concentration of hydrogen, which is an atom, and or a molecule. And this concentration of hydrogen ions is known as pH, and the pH level that we have normally in our body is between 7.35 and 7.45. This is a scale of the concentration of hydrogen ions. And this is important then to sustain the metabolic reactions within our body. Another characteristic of living organisms is that they can differentiate and they can grow, and this is known as development. And of course, living organisms can reproduce. They can produce copies of themselves, and they can pass the genes into the offspring. So this is reproduction, another characteristic of life. Now, physiology is the study of the function of the structures in our body. And just similarly as for anatomical variation, you can expect to have physiological variation or differences in function of the structures of our body. So why physiological variation happens? Well, because we have different genders, we have different sex, we age, we can have changes in diet, we have differences in weight, physical activity, differences in genetic composition and environment. For instance, one physiological variation in females. Females before puberty or adolescence, they don't produce certain hormones like estrogens and progesterone, and thus they don't have menses. But once we reach puberty, we start producing these hormones, estrogen and progesterone, preparing us for reproduction. And then we start having menses. And as we age and we reach the age of menopause, these estrogens and progesterone levels drop, and then we stop having menses because we are not able to reproduce anymore. So this is one example of a normal physiological variation. Okay, and when it comes to textbooks, they usually give us the typical physiological values, which in the case of males will be giving you what are the specific functioning of males that are 22 years old, that they have 154 pounds in weight, and that they have a light physical activity. And this male will be consuming around 2,800 kilocalories per day. So this will be the reference man. Now in textbook also they have a reference woman, which is having the same characteristics as males, so 22 years old, and the weight for females will be 128 pounds with light physical activity, but this female will be consuming 2,000 kilocalories per day. And when it comes to actual interpreting these physiological values in order for provide treatment or understanding a disease in humans, is to consider that there are physiological variations. It is not the same calculating a drug that you're going to give to an elderly person than to calculating for a child, because you have to take into consideration not only the age but also the weight. And also you consider as well in physiological variation when you're giving a drug if this person doesn't have any underlying condition. So for instance, if someone has problems with the kidney or renal failure, the person won't be able to take a specific drug at the normal level for this age and this weight of the person, because the drug is not going to be eliminated as well by the kidney, and the person can be over medicated. So all of these physiological variations, then it is very important to take into account. Now in homeostasis, since you are trying to maintain an equilibrium or a stable internal condition, your body will be detecting changes in the environment, and it will be activating mechanisms to oppose drastic changes to maintain this healthy condition or this stable internal condition that it maintains us, to be healthy. So you have something that's called negative feedback that allows for dynamic equilibrium. So once you have produced a change in your body, you will try to reverse it through negative feedback. So you can have a specific set point. And when someone is incapable of reversing this drastic change in our body, the person will lose homeostatic control, and this can result in illness or death. Now, this negative feedback is the most common type of way or mechanism that our body used to maintain this equilibrium. And it is part of a feedback loop, this negative feedback. So we have, for instance, this classical example of controlling the body temperature. So when someone is exposed to high temperature and the body starts gaining this heat, the blood vessels in our skin will dilate, so you can have more blood circulation through this skin, and then you can dissipate heat. So this is a heat losing mechanism. Now, if you put this person in a very cold environment, the person's body is going to start shivering, and then the blood vessels within the skin will constrict, so you don't dissipate heat through this blood circulation across the skin, and then you will maintain the specific body temperature. This is known as heat gaining mechanism. So these two negative feedback parts of homeostasis will help to control the body temperature. And it's very typical that in the textbooks of anatomy and physiology, they show you this example of negative feedback to regulate the environment temperature in a room. So in a room, if you set your thermostat to maintain the temperature to 67 degrees Fahrenheit, your thermostat will activate the furnace if it's cold, and then, or colder than this temperature, and then you will have this furnace generating heat that is going to be released into the room. And then when you reach 68 degrees Fahrenheit, your thermostat will shut off the furnace so you can maintain 67 degrees Celsius, and then your room will cool down. So similarly happens with our body. The normal body temperature will be 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. And then you can have certain variation plus 0.5 degrees Celsius or minus 5 degrees Celsius. So your temperature, your body, normal body temperature can vary between 37.5 degrees Celsius to 36.5 degrees Celsius, or 99.5 Fahrenheit and 97.7 Fahrenheit. And then you have this fluctuation, and if you reach a temperature lower than 97.7, your body starts shivering and you have vasoconstriction, so you can bring it back to the normal set point, which is 37 degrees Celsius. But if it's hot and your body temperature reaches higher than 37.5 or 99.5 Fahrenheit, you will start sweating. So you can lose heat, and then you can bring back to the normal body temperature. So it's a dynamic equilibrium. As long as you have variation within this range, you are okay, but things can happen in your body when you go outside of the range. Another example for homeostatic compensation is to prevent drastic changes in your blood pressure. Blood pressure, it's a force that maintains the circulation of blood throughout the body. And this will help us to stay in a conscious level. So when someone is laying on its bed and the person rises from bed, the blood pressure tends to drop because the blood will go from the head into the legs. And in order for us to maintain blood supply into the brain, which is very important to keep us conscious, you will start detecting these changes in our blood vessels that we know as baroreceptors. So when you have a drop in your blood pressure, these baroreceptors will sense this change, and then they will send a signal into the brain using nerves, and the brain will send a signal back into our heart so you can start beating your heart faster, so you can increase your blood circulation into your brain so your blood pressure doesn't drop as much, and then you don't faint. So that's how you maintain normal blood pressure, by increasing your heartbeats, because you detect this drop in the blood pressure first, and then you send this signal into your heart. So three things come into play when you have a negative feedback. So you have a receptor, which is a structure within the body that can sense the change, like in the case of the baroreceptors that we have in our heart. And then you have an integrating control center, which is this part of the brain in the case of when you are detecting changes in blood pressure, the cardiac center of the brain that can detect if there is a sudden drastic change in the blood pressure. And this center is called control center or integrating center. And once this center makes sense of what is going on in your body, it will send a signal into a cell or an organ to carry an instruction. In this case will be increasing the heart rate when you have a drop in the blood pressure, so you don't have low circulation into your cells in the brain, so you don't faint, so you can restore homeostasis. So you have a receptor, an integrator or control center, and an effector, an organ that carries out instructions from the control center. So negative feedback, then, it's one way to maintain a homeostasis, but also you have positive feedback. And positive feedback, it is the mechanism that produces a rapid change in our body when it's necessary. Now, most of the times we maintain homeostasis through negative feedback, but also you can use positive feedback. And positive feedback is a self-amplifying cycle in which you have a greater change in the same direction. So this feedback loop is repeated as long as it's necessary to maintain it. So in this case, you start with a change in which you produce, for instance, a substance, and you will like to produce some more to maintain this homeostasis. Examples of positive feedback will be when a female during reproductive age is pregnant and is undergoing childbirth. So this feedback will maintain as long as the female is in this process of childbirth, so that the baby can born. Another positive feedback mechanism is through blood clotting, protein digestion, and generation of nerve signals. So in this figure, we can see what happens during positive feedback. So in this case, in this female in childbirth, you have the baby inside her uterus, and the baby's head is compressing against this part of the uterus that is known as the cervix, and you have receptors here in the cervix that send signals into the brain, and the brain will send a signal into the uterus by using hormones like oxytocin. So the female brain will produce oxytocin. It will release this oxytocin, this hormone, into the bloodstream. This oxytocin will reach the muscles of the uterus, and then the uterus muscles will contract, and then these contractions will force the baby out of the uterus. So this it will produce these pain labors that we know. Now, another important concept to physiology, it is the presence of gradients within our body and the flow of substances because of the presence of gradients. So what is a gradient? A gradient is a difference in the chemical concentration of substances. It's a difference in chemical charges. It's a difference in temperature. It's a difference in pressure between 2 points. So, thanks to these gradients, you can have flow. Usually, substances, charges, temperature, and pressure will flow from an area of high concentration to low concentration. And we have examples. So matter and energy tend to flow down their concentration gradient. So the blood will flow from an area high pressure to low pressure. But you can have movement of substances or chemicals against their concentration gradient or in opposite direction. This is what is known as up gradient. And these movements in opposite direction helps in the flow of molecules, so you can maintain an equilibrium. So this figure shows you the example of how down concentration or up concentration gradients happen. So in this case, you have someone going downhill. So this is going from high to low, This is a down gradient. You don't use energy. And when you go uphill, you go from less to more. You have an up gradient. You use energy. And in here for the blood flow, your blood will flow from an area high pressure close to the heart from an area of low pressure away from the heart. So the blood will flow down pressure or down their concentration. Another example is the flow down of substances, like in the case of glucose. So this is a cell and this is outside of the cell. So the particles here depicted in green will be the glucose, dietary glucose, and this will be the intestinal cells. So if you have outside of your intestinal cells high concentration or many molecules of glucose, these molecules of glucose will flow down their concentration gradient. So from more to less. So in here inside the intestinal cells, you don't have as many glucose. So the molecules of glucose will flow from high concentration to low concentration or down their concentration gradient. In the case of sodium ions, this is a molecule. Okay, so the sodium ions, since they have a positive charge, they will go into an area or a compartment that has negative charges because they will be attracted to these negative charges. It's the law of opposite attracts. The positive will be attracted to the negative. So in this case, you have ion flow down electrical gradient. So from positive to negative. Inside the cells, we have negative molecules or negative charges, and outside of the cell we have positive charges. So the sodium ions will flow from positive to negative. And in the case of the blood, so inside our blood vessels we have high temperature and outside we have lower temperature. So this will be the skin. This will be a blood vessel near to our skin. And then outside of our skin, of course, we have the environmental air, which is cool air. So the heat of our blood will get transferred from the blood vessel into the skin and then into the environment, so we can cool off our body temperature. So this is flow down gradients examples. So one way to analyze medical terms is by using scientific terms and acronyms. So scientific terms, they usually have one root or stem that has the core meaning, and then it will have combining vowels that will join the roots of the words, and you can have prefixes or suffixes, which are little parts of a word at the starting of the word in the case of prefixes, or at the end of the words in the case of suffixes, that can modify the meaning of the root of the word. An example will be cardiomyopathy. For instance, in this case we have this root cardi, which means heart, and then we have this combining vowel, which will be O, and then myo, it's another root which means muscle, and then we have pathy, which will be the suffix, which means disease. So cardiomyopathy will be a disease of the muscle, of the myo, of the heart, cardiomyopathy, a disease of the muscle of the heart. And then frequently in science we use acronyms, which are pronounceable words that are formed from the first letter or the first few letters of a series of words. For instance, PET scan is positron emitted tomography. And we will use many of these acronyms. For instance, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, which is a macromolecule that is forming part of the nucleus of our cells or in the mitochondria. Okay, so we will use many of these. Now, many words will have a plural form, a singular form, it will have adjectival or possessive forms. Examples of plural. So the surface of an organ, for instance, is called cortex. This will be singular, but cortices is the plural form. An example of the meaning of corpus, which is body, is singular. Body in anatomy is corpus. But if you want to refer to several bodies or more than one, that will be corpora. An adjectival form of a term can appear different than the noun form. For instance, brachium, which means arm, and the adjective for the noun brachium will be brachii, which is of the arm. And an adjective also many times follows a noun that it modifies. For instance, biceps brachii, which is a muscle. Biceps, it's a muscle that we have in our body. But in this case, we have two biceps in our body. We have one in the leg that is called biceps femoris, and then we have another one in our arm that is called biceps brachii because it's the biceps of the arm. So this is the adjective form for the biceps muscle. So as a review of the major themes that we see in this lecture will be that anatomy and physiology are the unity of form and function. So they are complementary of each other and they cannot be separate. Okay, if you know through anatomy the structure of one organ or one tissue, you can understand the physiology or the function. Now in cell theory, we have a structure which is a cell that has a specific function that results from the activity of several cells. And then within our body, we have hierarchy of complexity, so the organism being at the top level and atoms being at the bottom level. And if you have a problem even at the atomic level, the entire organism can have consequences. And homeostasis is this constant maintenance of stable conditions within our body, and then the gradients and flow. So matter and energy tend to flow down their concentration gradient. So again, it's very important that you understand this. So things in our body or substances in our body tends to flow from more to less most of the time. Lastly, just to touch a little bit in medical imaging, everything in our body it can be studied indirectly with the aid of medical imaging, and one of the branches will be radiography. And radiography uses X-rays most of the time as a physical agent to study the structures of our body. It was discovered around 1885, these X-rays by William Röntgen, and these X-rays, which is a physical agent, are its physical radiation. It will penetrate our tissues, and these X-rays can darken a photographic film beneath the body, and dense tissues like our bone will appear radio opaque or white, while not so much dense parts of our body like muscles, like tissues of our lungs, etc., will appear dark or radiolucent. And over half of all medical imaging, it is based on X-rays. Now, sometimes in radiology or radiographies, you can use radiopaque substances to see internal structures that you normally won't see in X-rays. So these radiopaque substances can be injected into veins or they can be swallowed, and then they can fill internal hollow structures like blood vessels or the intestinal tract. So this is an example of a simple x-rays or a radiograph of the skull. So you can see these radio-dense bones, and then you can see air in here. This is radiolucent. Anything that is dark is called radiolucent. Anything that it is opaque, it is opaque. This is a serial angiogram. So in this case, you have injected contrast material into the blood vessels, so you can see the blood vessels in our neck and in our brain. So you can see these blood vessels. Just in case that you have an obstruction, you can see it with this cerebral angiogram. And these angiograms, it can be used for any blood vessels in our body. A CT scan or computed tomography, it is a type of x-rays that uses computers to analyze different tissues in our bodies, and it's a little bit more sophisticated than simple x-rays. It increases the sharpness of the image, and it can provide you slices in transverse section of our body. Now, MRIs or magnetic resonance imaging are more sophisticated studies than CT scans. They have a superior quality. It is better to study soft tissues in our body, and this will use a magnetic field that it is produced through the alignment and realignment of hydrogen atoms that we have in our body. And as these hydrogen atoms are vibrating, it will produce different levels of energy that can be detected by computer, and then through this computer imaging, you can produce an image. So this is a CT scan of the brain. So you can see here the skull, you can see the brain, in here the temporal lobes of our brain, in here you can see the cerebellum, here you can see the eyes, and then you can see part of the nasal cavities here. This is an MRI, so you can see the resolution in comparison to this previous image of CT scan is much better. At some point you can see even here the eye muscles in here, and these nerves that connects the retina, a part of our eyes, to the brain. So MRIs are a little bit more having more detailed view than the CT scans. We have also within radiology these sophisticated studies that are more expensive and more challenging in the technical aspect, but they can provide a lot of information. We have PET scans or positron emission tomography, in which you can study the function of a tissue. So you can assess the metabolic state of a tissue. You can give, for instance, substances like glucose to someone. You can inject glucose that is radio labeled, and tissues that are very active can take this glucose much easier than non-active tissues. And you can, for instance, infer if someone has a tumor, because tumors are tissues that are more metabolically active than non-tumor cells. And in the case of positrons, these are molecules that are found at the atomic levels that when they are bombarded by gamma rays, by a device, you can produce gamma rays, and these gamma rays will be detected by a sensor that is connected to a computer, and that will produce you an image of color that can be contrasted to other structures around it that can provide you very valuable information. So in this case, you have a PET scan of the brain, and this spot in here that you see in red color, this is a spot that has higher level of metabolic activity than the surrounding tissues that you can see here in green, in yellow, and in purple color. So this is a functional study, PET scan, rather than a structural study. One of the other medical imaging studies that we can use to study internal structures of our body would be sonography. And sonography is very useful because it is using sound waves rather than X-rays. And these X-rays regularly are harmful to our body, so this sonography, it's a very nice study because you don't expect to have consequences of someone being exposed to X-rays, especially babies. So these sonography studies are very useful in obstetrics to see babies. And although the image is not very sharp, it can provide you very useful information. So here you can see this female undergoing fetal sonography, and sonography has evolved a lot in these recent years, that now you can have 3D fetal sonography, that you can see the characteristics of the head of the baby or any other part of the baby. So in this case, you can see even the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the entire facial features of the baby. So it is a nice study. Okay, so this is all for this chapter. I will see you in the next chapter. Bye bye.